Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of the Dungeon Lords video series video review I'm putting together. A quick caveat before we get started. One, this is being filmed in a separate room that I normally film from, so I'm hoping the lighting and the background noise works out perfectly. Hopefully it works in my favor. I don't have access to my normal recording room because I have family visiting right now. The other thing you're going to notice is that I actually have the game set up for a 3-player game. Now, I know in the tutorial video I said that I wasn't going to exactly show you the slight differences that happen when you play with 2 or 3 players. Dungeon Lords is meant to be played with 4 players, and it has to have 4 players. And if you don't have access to 4 players, it does have rules to have dummy players for a 3rd or a 4th player if you need it. I didn't want to show you how to play that because I didn't want to confuse the tutorial, and I didn't want to add extra bloat to a video when it's just a couple different changes. But I do want to show you exactly how that changes the gameplay once you add in those AI players, because it might influence your decision how much or how willing you are to play Dungeon Lords. And I'm also going to make some comments about it when it comes to my final review, so I definitely want to show you exactly what it looks like when you play with 2 or in this case 3 players. To save a little bit of time, I have everything all set up in advance. What I went ahead and did is set up a 3-player game where the red player is going to be the dummy or the AI player, and we have yellow, blue, and green set up. I already got everybody set up with their predetermined orders that they're not going to have access to. Everybody already has their starting resources. Just to give you a quick heads up of what we're starting with, the green player does not have access to building tunnels or buying monsters the first round. The blue player does not have access to buying monsters or digging for gold on the first round, and the yellow player does not have access to gaining food or increasing reputation with the villagers. And again, the red player is going to be the AI dummy player. Basically, the way this is going to work is we do have the full deck of 8 cards. And again, I'm not going to give you a full tutorial. I just want to show you exactly how this is going to work. When it comes to the point where we're assigning all of our orders, and this will make sense when you watch this played, I'm going to randomly pick 3 cards out of these 5, and those are going to be the orders that the red player is going to take, and these 3 cards will be put back on their deck. So we know that there's 3 cards that are going to come out of this deck as soon as that phase comes around that the red player is going to try to basically use, but it's basically a blocking to make everything more difficult for the green, the blue, and the yellow players. Also, one more final boring bit before we get to the good stuff here. This video may run long because Dungeon Lords, when you know how to play the game, it can go pretty quickly, but when I'm taking the time, which I normally try to do, to explain exactly the decisions I'm making, how those decisions are affecting all the players, and why we're using these logical decisions, it is going to slow things down quite a bit. Now, this video starts running too long, and I do want to try to go through an entire year, not just one of the couple of seasons. I want to go through an entire calendar year, then flip it over and actually show you how the combat's going to work after all of our 3 Dungeon Lords have built up their resources for the combat phase. If the video does go too long, I'm going to split this video into 2 parts. The first part will be just the seasons board. The second video I'm going to do, if it comes down to it, will be the other side of this board showing the combat, showing just how well these 3 Dungeon Lords are going to be able to survive through the first calendar year. This is more than enough rambling on my part. You came here to see Dungeon Lords played, and we're going to go ahead and begin with the very first thing in the very first season, which is the seasonal winter. So we're going to move the marker to the very first part of the winter phase. Now, the first thing we need to do, and again, if we ever forget, it's always listed on the board. First thing we're going to do is we're going to grab 2 rooms, and we're going to go ahead and add them to the board as rooms that are potentially purchasable by the players. We're going to get 1 room that's going to allow you to trade your imps in for some gold, and we're going to get 1 room that's going to allow you to use some imps to put them to work to get some traps. The next thing we're going to look at is it's going to say that we need to pick 3 monsters that are going to be added to the board. Again, we're first year, so everything's going to be done with the silver-backed cards for the rooms, for the monsters, and for the heroes, and also for the Sorry, I almost called them action cards. The combat cards are already set. We have our first year combat cards right here. We're not going to see the second year, but I'm just setting them up so you see exactly how it's going to work when you have the game completely set up for all the players. So again, we need to get all 3 of our monsters. Our first monster we got was a goblin. Second monster we got is a slime. And then the final monster we're going to get is the troll. Next thing we need to look at tells us to reveal the very first event, because this is one of those games, while like I said in my tutorial video, it's controlled chaos. It's definitely controlled to the point where if you know what you're doing, you can control it and not really be affected by the chaos. So having said that, we're going to go ahead and reveal exactly what the first event is going to be, and we're going to see if the first event we're going to receive once we get to that point is that we need to feed any and all monsters we happen to have in our dungeons at that time. After we reveal the event, it shows that we're going to reveal some adventurers, and we put them on the first season. Now normally you would reveal 4 adventurers, and these 4 adventurers would be arranged, and possibly they're going to eventually end up in our Dungeon Lords dungeons, but since we're only playing with 3 players, we actually only reveal 3 of the adventurers, because the 4th one will never ever appear, so we don't have to worry about it. So just to save time, you don't even need to set up the 4th adventurer. So once we reveal all of our adventurers, we need to make sure that there's at least one different symbol on them. And we see that all 3 of our adventurers have the exact same symbol, so we're going to discard the top one, or I'm sorry, the last one. And we're going to keep on replacing them until we have one that gives us a different symbol. That way we can have the different order. And then we need to arrange them. Luckily it already happened for us, just the way we drew them. From strongest, meaning the most intricate glyph is the one who's going to be the most powerful, or the most furthest to the right, and the one with the least fanciest or the weakest adventure is going to be the one furthest to the left. Now again, we're only playing with 3 players, so we only need 3 adventurers, so we're actually done with the very first phase of the first part of the winter phase. And now we advance to the next part of the winter phase, where we get to start assigning our orders on the order board and start gaining our resources we're going to need for the future parts of the game. Since we are playing with an AI player, the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what actions the AI player is actually going to be taking. So we're simply going to take the AR cards that are left over that have not been already put out, and these are going to be the actions that the red player is going to be taking on this phase. So the first thing we're going to do is reveal the first card that they're going to be taking, which is an imp. The second one they're going to be doing is they're going to try to purchase a trap. And then the final thing they're going to do is they're going to take up the space for the food. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and take the top 3 cards, because they're actually not orders used by the red player this round. And we know that the red player on this turn, they're going to block the number 2 space for imps, the number 2 space for traps, and the number 2 space for food. And just for quickness and brevity, we can go ahead and do that right now. So we'll put a red imp on the number 2 space for purchasing imps. We're going to put it on the number 2 space for purchasing traps, and the number 2 space for purchasing food. And now those 3 spaces are not accessible to our yellow, our blue, and our green players. This is the point in the game where each player needs to really hunker down and really needs to decide exactly what strategy they're going to go for, why they're going to go for that strategy, and try to make sure they make that strategy the most efficient for them, based on the fact that there's some orders they don't have access to at the beginning of the game. Having said that, the yellow players' logic and their thought process that they're going to start following this very early in the game, they're going to look at a couple things. First, they're going to look at there's going to be an early tax. I'm sorry, not a tax. There's going to be an early feeding phase for any monsters that you may have. So that means that all monsters purchased prior to this event are basically going to cost twice. So if the yellow player decided that they want to buy this troll, and I'm not going to do that, but I'm just going to use this as an example. If I decided to buy this troll as a yellow player, it's going to cost me 2 food to purchase that troll. And then when we arrive at this feeding step right here, I'm going to pay another 2 food to keep this troll. And if I can't pay that 2 food to keep that troll, he's going to wander away, terrorize across the countryside. And again, he's going to name drop to make sure everybody knows that the reason why he's terrorizing the countryside is because I failed to feed him, which means my evil meter is going to go up by 1 level. So if I were to purchase that troll, I know that I need at least 4 food just to make sure I have 4 food before this event happens. I'm only starting with 3 food. So the yellow player, using logic, has decided that buying a monster is not that important this early in their game, especially since there's going to be multiple chances still to buy food. I'm sorry, to still purchase monsters. I am buying monsters here, buy monsters here, and buy monsters here. And to be honest, while a troll is really, really nice, I know there's more trolls in this deck. And out of all these monsters, a troll would probably be the only one I want, even though the slime can be pretty darn decent in his own right. But again, using the logic and the thought process we have, we're not going to go for monsters as the yellow player. What we're going to decide to do as a yellow player is we're going to dig some tunnels, we're going to try to hire some imps, and we're going to buy a room for the simple fact that we like this room right here, because anytime you lay 4 imps on this room, it's going to allow you to get a free trap card, which is basically free traps every single production phase, as long as I have the imps that power it. And not only that, in the second year, if I have 8 imps, I can actually use this room twice, which is going to give me 2 traps every single production phase, as long as I have the imps to provide the work in that room. Now that I've made a decision on what I want to do as a yellow player for my actions this round, I need to figure out in what orders I want to do those actions based on looking at what orders my opponents do and or do not have access to. I can simply look at the green player and know for a fact that there is no way the green player is ever going to be able to add tunnels to his dungeon this season because we know this is one of the orders that's not accessible to the green player this turn. So having used that thought process, we know that the only person I need to worry about possibly using the build tunnels action would be the blue player. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do it, but I know that they're the only person who could do that action. Now the second space for the building tunnels action, of course, is the most lucrative, so I want my building of tunnels action card to be further down, so my hopes is that the blue player will also pick that action, and I'll end up getting the second place where I have the 3 M's, which is allow me to build a lot of tunnels, which is what I want to do, because I want to have that option to build the tunnels so I can eventually buy this trap room. So we're going to go ahead and take that action, and normally we play these cards face down so nobody else knows exactly what actions we're placing. But I'm going to go ahead and place it face up just so you understand my thought process as I'm explaining to you exactly what the yellow player is thinking. The other thing I want to do, remember, is I want to purchase a room, and the other thing I want to do is I want to get more imps to go to work for me. Now I need to decide exactly in what order I want to do these actions. Now I see that the purchasing of imp space, the second one, the best one, is already taken. And the third one looks pretty darn decent too, but I don't want to lose gold this early because I know one of these event tiles is going to be taxation. And taxation means I'm going to have to spend 1 gold for every 2 tiles, every 2 corridors or rooms I happen to have in my dungeon. So I don't want to start spending gold this early, especially since I'm not sure I can start earning gold quick enough. So having thought about that and the fact that I may have to end up paying for this room also, I'm going to put my imps down as my first action, and then I'm going to take the buying the room as my final action because it's always good to be lowest down on this, so that way I guarantee I have first pick of the rooms over here because the yellow player is the last player. It's going to go green, blue, and yellow. Now that I explained the actions for the yellow player, I'm going to quickly off camera sit up and decide what the blue and the green player are going to do, then we're going to go ahead and resolve those actions. But before I do that, let me flip these over so you can see exactly how this would normally work in a real game because nobody is ever allowed to see what actions you're going to be performing. It's supposed to be a surprise and everybody reveals their actions at the exact same time. Now that all of our players have decided on what orders they're going to be taking on this winter season, we're going to go ahead and reveal these one at a time. And everybody's basically going to reveal their first action at the exact same time. And they're going to decide where we're going to go exactly from there and place their imps, and we're just going to simply go down the line starting in player order. Since the green player is the first player and we are going in clockwise order, we're going to see that the first worker for the green player is going to go on the increasing the reputation space. Since they're the very first player, they need to put their spot in the number 1 spot, which is also going to allow them to look at the combat card, any one of the combat cards they want. But remember, when they put these combat cards back down, they need to put them back down in the exact same order they started in. So now we move to the blue player, and they decide as their first action is they want to purchase a trap. The yellow player decided that their first action, as we already know, is that they're going to be working on getting some imps, which is going to cost them 1 food, but for them that's a very easy cost to justify, not a big deal at the start of the game. Now everybody's revealed their first action. We're going to start with the green player, and everybody's going to go ahead and reveal exactly what their second action or their second order for this winter phase is. Green player is working on imps. The blue player decided that they're also going to purchase a room. So it's probably a good thing we made sure to keep our room decision as the last action. And then yellow player, as we already know, they're going to work on putting some imps to work to build some tunnels. Now it's not exactly the best decision we wanted, not exactly what we wanted. Preferably we would prefer to get there for put all 3 of the imps to work, but sometimes you get what you do and sometimes you don't. Apparently someone is trying to outthink us and outperform us. So we have to work with what we got and see that we're only be able to put 2 works to work building tunnels, but at least we'll be able to position those tunnels in a way so we purchase this room that's going to give us those traps. So we're actually doing A-okay on that aspect. Now we're going to reveal our final card for all of our players. Green is going for traps. Blue is going to dig tunnels. And yellow, as we already know, is they're going to purchase a room. So starting with green, they're going to put their worker over here on the traps. Blue is going to put their worker on the digging the tunnels, so they actually got the best start for them, so they're going to get some extra gold, so they actually played very well for them. And then yellow is going to come over here to the purchase room, which is a great action for them because they now get very first choice on what room they want. Now that we figured out what orders our minions are going to go out there and perform for us, we now go ahead and just simply resolve those orders from left to right, top to bottom. And remember, the shortest bar is the one who's going to resolve first. And that doesn't matter for the first 6, but definitely matters for the last 2 because the one closest to the bottom is the one who's going to resolve first. So we're simply going to start with the feeding. The only person that decided to do feeding was the red player. And since the red player is just a dummy player, we don't need to worry about it. They don't actually perform anything. They just block those action spaces. We're now going to go ahead and work on the reputation space, and only the green player decided to work on his reputation. So green is going to go down 1 on the evil meter, and they get to look at any one of these cards they like. We're going to go ahead and look at the top card since we have no idea what any of the cards are. That's probably the best decision to do at this time. We're going to see at the top card, and remember, only the green player is actually allowed to see this card, so only the green player knows exactly what this card is. But we're going to see it's the Detect Evil spell, and we're also going to see it's going to be 2 fatigue damage to the adventurers when we get to that phase. So green player has a little bit of knowledge over the other players. We're going to put that card back down on top because remember, these cards are never allowed to change their order. Green has hidden information over the other players, and it's information they're definitely not going to share with the other players. Now that we've done the happiness meter or the reputation meter for our evil dungeon lords, we're going to work on the space where it's going to allow us to put our imps to work to help expand our dungeon. First person who's going to resolve is going to be the yellow player. Now remember, the yellow player has already decided that they want this room tile, and they know for a fact that they're going to get it because they're going to get first dibs when it comes to room tiles. So they know for a fact they need to have a room on one of the outskirts here, because we see from looking at this room tile that it can only exist in the outskirts. Now, it wouldn't be very bright to put this room as our very first room because, trust me, losing dungeon rooms is something that happens quite often in this game. So if we want this room, we want it as far away from the entrance as possible, so we want to use that logic process when we're building into our dungeon. So we have 2 imps, up to 2 imps we can put to work, and we're definitely going to put both those imps to work, digging our tunnels and making our dungeon just a little bit deeper. We're going to put our first one right down like that, and then our second tunneling system is going to go down just like that. Now remember, the rules are anytime you add tunnels to the board, you can't occupy a full 2x2 grid system. Not that we need to worry about that, but just a little reminder about the rules there. We put our 2 imps to work, expanding our dungeon, and now we have to be careful because when taxation time comes, we see that we have 5 rooms or corridors or mix of. So we know that when taxation comes, we're going to have to spend at least 3 gold on taxation, or we're going to get some red marks, which are going to be worth negative points at the end of the game. So we need to make sure when that taxation phase comes around, it's either going to be here or it's going to be here. We need to have at least 3 gold in the bank. Now the blue player also wants to expand their dungeon, and they're going to go ahead and use all 3 of their imps, because if we look at the board, we do see that we do have access to all 3 of our imps. And we're going to go ahead and build our dungeon in such a way that's going to cause a little bit of confusion for the adventurers, but also in a way that's going to help us later on to get some of these rooms out there, especially since we know that we're going to try to get one of these 2 rooms, whichever's left over after the yellow player gets their decision. So we're going to go ahead and build 3 tunnel tiles, and we're going to add them directly to the board for our blue player, putting all 3 of our imps to work, which means they have no more imps to put to work, but that's okay. They like this decision, and the blue player is pretty happy, and they know now they're going to have to be very careful because when taxation comes, they're also going to need at least 3 gold. None of our players decided to dig for gold, and that's probably a good early decision. Who knows? We'll see how the work tiles as the season plays out, so we're going to bypass the digging for gold, and we're going to move on directly to purchasing imps. Now, the yellow player is going to have to decide first if they want to purchase an imp, and it's going to cost them 1 food. Pretty much a no-brainer for the yellow player at this point. Having more imps is definitely going to help them out, so we're going to purchase 1 imp for 1 food. The red player is going to take that space away. And then the green player gets to decide if they want to buy 2 imps. It's going to cost them 1 food and 1 gold. Green player decides that's a pretty darn easy decision for them to make. They're going to spend 1 gold and 1 food. And now they have access to 5 imps that they can put to work digging for gold, building tunnels, or whatever decisions they wish to do. Now we get to look at the purchasing of traps orders card. Again, we're going to handle these from order shortest bar to the longest bar. So that means the blue player, if they want, they can spend a gold to take the top trap card from the trap deck. The blue player says pretty much a no-brainer there. That's definitely what they want to do. So they're going to spend 1 gold. And then the blue player, of course, is allowed to look at their trap, but they don't have to show it to any of the other players. Once the blue player is done examining their trap, they're going to go ahead and place it face down on their dungeon board so the other players have no idea exactly what trap the blue player just purchased. The red player, of course, they're just taking up space. And then we come to the green player who needs to make a decision if they want to spend 2 gold to get 2 traps. Well, the green player says, what the heck, I'm just going to have to work very hard to get some gold in some of the later rounds. Luckily, they have a lot of imps to put to work, so they're not too stressed about that just yet. They spent the 2 gold, and they get to get 2 traps for spending the 2 gold. And again, the green player can look at their traps at any time, but they do not have to show them, or they shouldn't show them to other players. Look at the 2 traps. Once they've seen what traps they have, they simply place them face down on their dungeon board, and we're now done with the trap phase. We're going to move on to the monster purchasing. Nobody wanted to purchase any monsters, which is pretty interesting. But I think everybody's using the same logic I used that I explained earlier, that why pay taxes twice for monsters? Well, if you buy monsters after this phase, you don't have to pay and feed them a second time. So we're going to bypass this, and now we move on to the purchasing of the rooms. Now remember, the players resolve in the order of the shortest bar to the longest bar, so that means unlike these other action spaces, yellow gets to decide first if they want to spend 1 gold to pick one of these 2 rooms, and then the blue player is going to get whichever room is remaining, if they like, at 0 cost. So starting with the yellow player, again, we already know what the yellow player's decision was. They have the gold for it, they're going to spend the 1 gold, and they're going to purchase the trap room. And they have to place it in a legal position. They're going to put it all the way down at the deepest part of their dungeon with the hopes that no adventurers are going to get to it. So we take a lot of advantage of this room, get lots of traps for free, as long as we have the imps to put to work in that room. Now we come to the blue player, and they need to decide if they want to go ahead and get a free room. Well, free in the respect that they don't have to pay it gold to get it. They are going to go ahead and do this, and they just need to make sure they place it in a legal position somewhere on the board, which isn't too hard. We're going to go ahead and put it all the way on the bottom. Simply, same logic as before. We don't want this room so close to the entrance of the dungeon where the adventurers can come in there, easily take that room away from us, and not only do we lose the benefits of that room, but remember, when we lose rooms, we also lose victory points at the end of the game. Now that all our minions have carried out their orders, all their minions are going to simply return home and very happy because they've carried out the will of their their misunderstood dungeon lords. Now the orders phase is done, we're going to move on to the next phase, which is where we're going to allow us to put our imps to work in the production rooms, and we're also going to go ahead and get our order cards back and also move some of our order cards up. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to decide if anybody wants to put any of their imps to work in some of their production rooms if they have enough imps to do so. Unfortunately, we only have 2 players who have production rooms, the yellow and the blue player, and we see that this room takes 4 imps to work on, and this imp does not count since that was the imp that was helped building the tunnel that led to this room. We see that we actually only have 2 imps left over to put to work in a production room, which is not enough to use that room. So yellow can't use their room for the production phase, and we look at the blue player, who has no imps left over. And again, since this imp was actually used to produce the tunnel that allowed this room to be built, they don't actually count towards these 3 imps. So even if we had 2 imps left over, it still wouldn't be enough to use this gold producing room. So neither of our players get to do any production during the production phase. So all of our players are simply going to get back their cards, add them back to their hands, which are orders they can use on the next season. And then these 2 order cards are going to slide up because these are 2 order cards we don't have access to for the next season, which is going to be the spring season. We're just about done with the winter season. The only thing left to do is to move the starting or the first player token to the next player, which is going to move from green to the blue player. Then all of our players get to get all their imps back to their imp workshop where they're ready to do some more work on future rounds. Imps are industrious, hard little workers, and they're very, very happy to be put to work, but when they're done with their working, they definitely want to go home. This ends the winter phase for all of our players, and we're now going to move into the springtime where basically we're going to copy what we just did all over again. Starting with new rooms, new monsters, we're going to reveal the new event, and then some more adventurers are going to come onto the board. So simply in order, the first thing we're going to do is reveal 2 rooms. First room we're going to reveal is one that allows you to put 3 imps to work to produce some food. And the next room we're going to get is 3 imps to produce some gold. Since none of these monsters were purchased on the prior season, they're going to walk off and they're going to go off to some distant lands where they hopefully find better work. And we're simply going to reveal 3 new monsters, getting a vampire, a goblin, and finally we're going to get a ghost, which is a fun little monster. Not a monster, but a ghost. The next thing we're going to do, if we look down here, if we ever forget, is we're going to reveal what the next event is. And it looks like the next event is taxation. So now all of our players need to figure out a way to get a certain amount of gold before we get to this event phase because if they don't have the amount of gold, they're going to suffer some red marks, which are worth negative points. So now remember, the yellow player, since we have a total of 5 rooms or corridors in our dungeon, we're going to need 3 gold. Remember, you always round up. The blue player has 6, so they're going to need 3 gold. And then the green player, if they stay with only 3 corridors, by the time we get to that point, they're only going to need 2 gold. But that's not a really good strategy. They definitely want to get some rooms built very, very quickly. So now that we revealed this, now we need to add some more adventurers to the board. Now remember, we're only playing 3 players, so we're not going to be adding 4 adventurers. We're going to add 3 adventurers. And then once we've pulled out all 3 of our adventurers, we need to put them in order from strongest to the weakest. Unfortunately, it looks like we actually drew them in order from strongest to the weakest, so we don't have to worry about that at all. Now we move on to the orders part of the season. So remember, we are now in the spring season now. So for the orders part, the first thing we need to do is figure out what exactly orders the red AI player is going to take, and is going to cover and prevent our players from using the most optimal space from. First thing we're going to see is that they're going to block the gold space, the reputation space, and the building tunnel space, which could be pretty bad for our green player if they're not careful. These orders are going to be put back in the deck, and then we're going to put our minions out. We're going to block the number 2 on the gold space. We're going to block the number 2 on the reputation space. And we're going to block the number 2 on the building the tunnel space. Now our players need to decide exactly what orders they want to take to help get them ready for the end of the year and the eventual attack from these adventurers. And they also want to consider exactly where they want to be on the evil meter for when these adventurers start working towards their dungeons, which is going to happen very, very soon. The yellow player strategically actually has a really, really tough decision to make right now. They know that they need to get some gold somewhere stored in their bank account because they need to pay for these rooms when the taxation comes. They're also eyeballing the fact that we actually have 2 very good monsters on the board right now. We have the vampire, which is very, very good. The only negative to the vampire is the fact that he can attack priests. So if we can manage to control our evil meter to the point that we can prevent any priest from attacking our dungeon, the vampire is a great addition to our dungeon. The ghost is also a good addition to the dungeon. The only problem is you don't want the ghost to be alone. If you can have him out there with some couple other monsters, the ghost is actually pretty powerful. And the goblin himself actually isn't too bad in the very early stages of the game, especially if you can tie him up with a couple traps to make sure that he gets 1 attack in the beginning, makes a kill, and he gets to attack the second guy in the order. As long as you can combine him with some traps, he's pretty darn powerful. The problem here, though, is that if we get any of these monsters, we know that during the pay phase, we're going to have to pay these guys again. So whatever I paid to acquire them now, I'm going to have to pay again when it comes to that time. So even though these are some really good monsters, we like to get them help protecting our dungeon, we're actually going to skip and not try to get any monsters this turn because we're just not ready to pay a taxation. I'm sorry, not taxation, but the upkeep. And we also know that we need to get gold. So using this thought process, we know that we definitely want to work on getting some gold. So that's one of the definite order cards we definitely want to have for the yellow player. The other thing we're looking at is the fact that we definitely want more imps, because the more imps we have, the more we can use this room to start getting free traps. So we're definitely wanting more imps. The other thing that we definitely probably want is we definitely either want to work on our reputation so we can control who we get, because we really don't want these thieves, especially if we want to start relying on a lot of traps to keep our dungeon protected. So the lower our reputation is, the better the chances that we avoid these thieves who are at the front of the line, and the better the chances that we have our traps work to the utmost advantage for our player, or for our yellow player. So the other thing we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and decide that we're going to work on a reputation. So those are the 3 actions that we're going to go ahead and take. Now we need to decide in what exact order we're going to take these based on looking at what the other players are doing and what we expect those other players to accomplish on their turn. Well, we know that the green player most likely is going to work on getting tunnels, so that's probably the space they're going to go for, is lurking for tunnels, because we know they need them and they have access to them. And we know that the green player can't work on imps at all, so we don't have to worry about that because that order card's already used. So we're not sweating the imp too much, but we definitely want the imp towards the end so we get this really great space where for 1 food, 1 gold, we get 2 imps. So using that logic, we're going to put the imp card as the last card. Now, when it comes down to the reputation, we also want the best reputation hit we can possibly get. So what we're going to do is we're going to decide to put the reputation card down as our second one, and then we're going to put down our gold as the first decision. Now, this is actually a really tough decision for us because we technically would rather have the gold be our final one. But that's the fun of Dungeon Lords. It's always constantly balancing decisions and agonizing over decisions, trying to be the most efficient that you can. So we made all our decisions for the yellow player. What we need to do is make our decisions for the blue player and the green player. And I'll go ahead and do that quickly off camera. Now all of our players have made their decisions, and we're actually going to see some pretty interesting interaction going on right now, because technically these players aren't supposed to know what the cards they're playing, but we may just run into a little headbanging here because some players are going to get to do what they want and some players are not. So we're going to go ahead and start revealing. The blue player is going to reveal their first card since they're the first player. And again, normally when you play, everybody reveals at the exact same time, but I don't have 3 arms, so I'm doing this one player at a time. So we're going to see the first thing that the blue player is going to do is they're going to be working for gold. We're going to see that the yellow player is working for gold. And then we're going to see that the green player, they're going to go ahead and start digging some tunnels and trying to make their dungeon just a little bit bigger, especially for when these adventurers start trashing their dungeon. So the next series of cards, order cards, will be revealed. Blue is going to work on imps. Yellow is going to work on the reputation. And the green player is going to go ahead and work on gold, which is where we're going to see our first little bit of uh-oh type of situation. So the blue player is going to move their minion over onto the gaining the imps. Yellow is going to work on improving their reputation. And then the green player would love to be able to get some gold to start bringing some revenue into their dungeon. But unfortunately, we see that all 3 of these spaces are taken up, so they're not going to be able to use their minion on that action space. So they effectively have wasted their action this turn for them. We're going to go ahead and reveal the 3rd order cards for all of our players. We're going to be working on traps, working on gaining imps, and the green player is going to be working on building some rooms. So start with the blue player. They're going to go ahead for the traps. Starting with our next is yellow player, who's going to go ahead and work on some imps, which is going to cost them 2 food for 2 imps, which is perfect for them. And then finally, the green player is going to spend 1 imp to go over here and get a room. Luckily, they're the only one who actually went for the room, so they're going to be able to pick whichever room they like, and it's going to cost them no money at all, which is going to be pretty darn good for the green player, who already got cheated out of getting gold this round. Now we go ahead and resolve our orders in order, starting with from left to right, top to bottom. Nobody's going for food, so the first person is yellow. They're going to go ahead and increase their reputation by going down 1. And they're going to look at one of the cards. Well, we already know what the card is because the blue player earlier looked at it, so we already know it's the Detect Evil card. Of course, we can pick whatever card we want to look at, but normally that's what card we look at, so we're ready for whatever may befall our Dungeon Lord when that time comes around. The red dummy player is just there, of course, to take up spaces on the action board, so we're going to go ahead and remove our minion from that. Next, we get to come up to the working on the imps, and we're going to see how the green player, I'm sorry, not the imps, the green player is going to be building some tunnels, and they put up to 2 imps to work building tunnels. Now the green player has a decision to make here. They need to decide if they can make enough money when the time comes around, because you got to remember, we got taxation that's coming up and we're only at 1 more order phase. So if we build 2 more tunnels, when this taxation comes, we know that we definitely need to go for gold here, and we need to find some way to get at least 3 gold, which is going to cover up to 6 tiles on our dungeon board. So we need to decide if we want to put both of our imps to work, or just one of our imps, or none of our imps. So we're going to go ahead and be a little bit gutsy, and we're going to decide that we're going to put 2 of our imps to work, because we want to be prepared for when these adventurers start trashing our dungeon and start taking it apart. So we're going to add 2 corridors to our dungeon, which is going to cost us 2 imps to do. Put the imps out there to work, and then the green player is done. The red player is going to go ahead and take their space away. Just remember, they're doing a blocking thing. We're now going to come to the blue player, who can spend up to 2 imps to dig some gold to earn some money. So we'll just simply pick 2 corridors. Our 2 imps are going to earn us 2 gold just from working and digging some gold for us. The red player, again, was just a blocking. And then finally we come up to the yellow player, who can spend up to 4 imps digging for gold, but they need to have at least 1 imp acting as a 4 imp, no matter how many they spend. That's going to leave us with only 3 imps left over, but luckily that's still going to give us 3 gold, which is going to help us get ready for the taxation phase. We now have 5 gold, and we're actually pretty much set for when the taxation phase comes. So yellow is actually sitting pretty darn good at this point. The only thing they need to start doing is getting some food, so they get some of these monsters that come out, like the troll or maybe the goblins. It all depends on exactly what their strategy may be. Come over here to the hiring of the imps. The blue player can spend 1 food to gain 1 imp. They're going to go ahead and do so, gaining 1 imp. The yellow player can spend 2 food to gain 2 imps. We are going to go ahead and do that, which means we need to start getting some food back into our reserves, but we definitely want those 2 imps because imps can be put can be put out to work towards getting those traps for us during the production phase. Then we move over to the blue player who can spend 1 gold to go ahead and purchase 1 trap. They're allowed to look at it, but again, no other player can look at it. Got the curse ring. It's going to go face down on their dungeon board. Nobody decided to buy monsters. Again, everybody's kind of being cautious because of the payday, so nobody wants to get monsters this early in the game. Then finally, the green player gets to decide which one of these rooms they want for free. Unfortunately, this is pretty much a foregone conclusion for our green player. They know that they need gold pretty quickly, and they're basically taking a gamble at this point, so they're going to decide that they're going to take the room that produces gold. Unfortunately, it didn't come out at the best time because if we take this, we know that we have to build it in the upper 2 sections. So we're definitely going to have to make sure that we're definitely protecting this room, but sometimes you have to get what you can when you can, and it's not always the best for you, but that's the way the lack of planning can actually hit you. If I would have been planning a little bit smarter, I would have built this tunnel corridor right here, which will let me put the room right there, keeping it further back from the entrance to the dungeon. Now that I actually look at it, hindsight is 2020. Future planning is the name of this game. It's definitely what's going to make you a good player at Dungeon Lords, is the ability to plan multiple seasons, multiple rounds, and multiple turns in advance. Now that we've resolved all the orders, all the players except the green player can get all their minions back. The green player has to leave their 1 minion on that card, and we'll see why very shortly. If you remember from the tutorial, we're actually going to get the chance to keep that card if we want to, and we're definitely probably going to want to do that because, remember, green does need money very, very badly. After all of our minions have returned from their work, we can move on to the production phase and start getting our order cards back. Starting with the blue player, we're going to see if we have any production squares or production rooms that we can use. Unfortunately, we don't have enough minions to use this production room, so we're going to go ahead and skip that for the blue player. The yellow player doesn't have enough imps to use their production room either, so we got to make sure we start planning for that because we want to start getting those free traps as quickly as possible. And then finally we come to the green player who takes 3 imps for 1 gold. They can definitely do the production in this phase. It's going to give them 1 gold and help them out quite a bit because we need gold as a green player and we need it very, very quickly before the taxation comes around. That's the end of the production phase for all of our players. And now all of them get to get their order cards back, and they get to decide which order cards, in the case of the green player, they're going to actually send back and which ones are going to move up and become inaccessible orders for them. Now remember, every time you have a minion who wasn't able to do one of their orders, you can potentially keep that card if you like. Normally the way it works is after your orders are done, you move up the orders that are in these 2 slots, and these are the ones that move up. If one of your minions was unable to do an order, though, the reason why you left them on the card is to let you know that you can, if you like, decide to keep that order and let the other 2 order cards move up. And that's definitely what we're going to be doing for the green player. So since this minion is on this order card, we're going to keep this order card and make sure we have access to it starting the next order phase. And then these 2 order cards are going to move up and become the inaccessible order cards for the green player. That does end the production and the retrieval phase, and now we need to move on to the payment phase for any monsters we may have hired. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, depending how things work out for our dungeon lords in this precarious circumstance and situation that they're trying to survive through these 2 years, fortunately, none of them have hired any monsters, so none of them have to pay any of their monsters during this event phase. So this event phase is actually pretty quick. We can move past it. And now the adventurers are going to start moving towards our dungeon lords' dungeons. Now remember, the nicest dungeon lord when it comes to ties is the one who has the first player token. So if there's any ties between any of our dungeon lords, the bluest is always going to be the nicest dungeon lord, followed by yellow, followed by green. So using the spring adventurers, we're going to see that the very first weakest adventurer is going to go to the nicest dungeon lord between green and yellow. Well, yellow is closer to blue, so we know that yellow is nicer than green. So yellow is going to get the weakest adventurer, which is going to be the priest. The next weakest adventurer is going to go to the green dungeon lord. And then finally, blue being the least nicest because they're highest up on the evil meter. Remember, the start player token only breaks ties. Since blue happens to be highest in the evil meter, they're going to get the remaining adventurer, which happens to be the thief, which is always a pain in the neck for any kind of dungeon lord who wants to use a strategy that relies on lots of traps. Now that we've sent these adventurers to the dungeon lords and they're lined up, we're now done with this part of the phase, and we're now going to move on to the phase where the new first player marker is going to move over, and all the players are going to get their imps back who are now done working, and they're going to head back home like maybe the 7 little dwarves, and they're going to be ready to go to work on the next season doing whatever task you send them out to do. Back on, we've now moved into a new season. We are now in the summertime. The first thing we need to do is we need to get new rooms put out on the board. We need to get new monsters put on the board and get everything out on the board for our dungeon lords to purchase and to use. So the prior season's monsters, they're going to go away. Any rooms that weren't purchased on the prior round are also going to go away. And then the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out which 2 new rooms are going to be added to our purchasable spaces. Flip over the first one, and we're going to see 3 imps for food. And then we're going to see 2 imps to add a tunnel onto one of our dungeon boards if we happen to purchase that room, which is a very nice one and makes it very easy to expand our dungeon. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and reveal which 3 monsters are now going to be available. First monster is going to be the witch. The next one is going to be a vampire. And then the final monster we're going to get is going to be another witch. After we do that, we reveal the final event. Now we know the event is not going to be anything because we're playing with the standard rules, not the advanced rules. The advanced rules throw in the random event cards, and in this case we'd actually decide which event card this tile would be representing. But again, since we're using the standard rules, we're not going to use these event cards, which makes things a little bit easier on new players who are still learning to play the game. So basically at this point, this becomes a freebie for all of our players, and we don't need to sweat whether it's taxation or feeding. It's a nice free breather for our dungeon lords who now need to worry about what kind of adventurers are going to come out next. Flip over the first adventurer and we're going to get a thief. The next one we're going to get is we're going to get a warrior. And then the final one we're going to get is we're going to get a priest. Now since all 3 of these have the exact same rune, we're going to go ahead and remove the last guy and see if we can get somebody with a different rune. And we're going to get somebody who has a more complex rune than the 2 people ahead of them. So the order is actually going to change this time. And we're going to get a warrior with the least complex rune and a rogue with a matching rune. And then finally we're going to get a warrior who has the most complex rune. So we need to start paying attention to our evil meters and making sure we're getting the adventurers that we can combat easily and not getting the ones who are going to make our lives very difficult. Before our players can figure out what orders they're going to take, we need to figure out exactly which orders the red player is going to start blocking off, and that's going to help us with some of our decisions. Because right now the yellow player has a couple decisions they need to make. We know that they want food, and we also know that the yellow player also needs monsters, but then again they're fighting with everybody else who also wants monsters, and that's going to make it a very, very tough competition for the monsters. So while everybody played conservatively earlier, it's going to make things a lot tougher for all of our players because now everybody's fighting with the monsters because there's only 2 more chances to purchase monsters, and everybody, as we can see from their boards, all can purchase monsters. And not only that, we see that the red player is also going to block the middle monster purchasing space. They're also going to block off the food space, and they're also going to block off the purchasing of the imp space, and that definitely is going to affect the strategy that the yellow player wants to use right here and right now. Having looked at everything that just happened because of the red player tying up one of the monster spaces, and that means that there's only 2 spaces available to hire monsters. Yellow also knows that they want to keep their reputation down low because they don't want the thieves, and they probably don't want this really powerful warrior, so they know that if any one of these monsters are hired by anybody, their evil meter is going to go up. So using this thought process, we don't want thieves, we definitely want to be able to start using our trap spaces, and we definitely need food. So using that logic, we're going to go ahead and go for food. We're going to go ahead and go for getting gold, because we're definitely going to need gold to pay for the other thing we want to do, which is getting traps. So those are the 3 actions we're going to go ahead and decide to do this round. Although it's very, very tempting to buy this room right here, and since we're the first player, we pretty much get a good chance of getting that since we can control that a little bit. But we don't really want to put this room out yet because we don't have the corridors for it. So our current thought process, again, is we want food, we want gold, and we want traps. Now, since we're the first player, and we probably want the first food space because again we want our evil meter to stay down low. We're going to go ahead and make the food our very first decision. We want to get a trap, and we know that blue can't get a trap, so we only have to compete with green for traps. So if we make traps our last decision, there's a pretty good chance that we might end up getting a free trap. So we're going to go ahead and make our trap our last decision, which means gold is going to be our second decision, even though we're not going to use all 3 of the imps if that's the space we happen to get with. We want to save 4 imps back so we can get that free trap from using our trap purchasing room by putting our imps to work in that room. So that's going to end all of our decisions for our yellow player. Now off camera, I'm going to make quick decisions for our green and for our blue players. It's now time for our players to go ahead and reveal their orders, starting with the yellow player. Since they're currently the first player, they're going to reveal their first order, which is going to be going for food. The green player is going to be going after traps, and then the blue player is going to be going after monsters. No big surprises there at all. Yellow's going to go for the food. Green is going to go ahead and go for the traps. And then blue gets to go ahead for the monster space. And now finally we're going to go ahead and reveal our second order cards for all of our players. Yellow is going to go ahead and reveal the gold. Green is going to go ahead and reveal buying monsters. Again, not a big surprise. And then blue is going to go ahead and work for getting some gold. So yellow puts their worker on the gold space. Green sends their minion off to go ahead and try to get a monster to go ahead and work for them. And then finally blue is going to send one of their minions off to go ahead and allow their minions, their imps, to go ahead and start digging some gold. Now finally we reveal our final order card for all of our players. Yellow reveals a trap. Green reveals that they're going to be digging for gold. And blue reveals that they're going to be going after food. Yellow is going to get the trap, which is actually perfect for yellow because they're going to get their trap for free. Green is going to be digging, and luckily they have plenty of imps for it. They just are going to have to use one who's going to be the foreman, which isn't a problem for the green player since they have plenty of imps. And then finally the blue player is going to go out there and try to get some food, which is going to cost them a little bit of evil on the evil meter. Now we go ahead and reveal these again from left to right, top to bottom. We're going to go ahead and reveal all these orders and see what's going to happen for all of our players. Starting with the yellow player, yellow is going to have to pay 1 gold to go ahead and get 2 food, which is a pretty easy exchange for the yellow player. Not a problem at all. Red is going to go ahead and unblock their space. Then the blue player is going to spend 2 evil to get 3 food and 1 gold, which the blue player is actually pretty darn happy about right now. It's not high enough on the meter for the paladin, and they're still not so high that they're going to have to worry about getting the paladin when they purchase one of those monsters. So they gain 2 evil, and they're going to gain 3 food. And they're also going to gain 1 gold, which is a pretty good return, which is going to give us 4 gold, which is going to help us pay when the taxation time comes. So blue doesn't even have to worry about gold deficits anymore at this point. Nobody's working towards improving their reputation. Nobody's building tunnels. So now the yellow player gets to send 2 imps off to work to go ahead and dig for some gold, which is going to give the yellow player 2 gold to add to their treasury. The blue player can send up to 3 imps out there to work towards getting some gold. And that's actually a better exchange than using this room here, so they're going to spend or send all 3 of their imps out to go ahead and gain them 3 gold, which is going to be added to their treasury, which is going to be a good background or a good bank roll for them to help them for the later turns for later taxation. And then finally we come to the green player who needs to send 1 imp to be a 4 imp, and then they can send up to 4 imps, which they possess, out to gain 4 gold, so they're going to be okay when the final taxation comes for the taxation event, because now they happen to have 5 gold. We now move over here to the purchasing the imp, which none of our players decided to do. We now come to the trap, so green needs to spend 1 gold if they want to purchase 1 trap. All they need to have is at least 3 gold, so they're a-okay. They'll definitely spend the 1 gold to go ahead and gain 1 trap. They're going to look at the trap and see that they get firewall. No other players get to see it. They're going to place it face down. And then the yellow player gets to get a trap, which is going to cost them nothing because they got the second space. The yellow player gets the very first trap, which is the pendulum, which is a very nice trap to have, especially if you don't have any thieves to worry about. And then we're going to move over to the purchasing the monsters. Now, we see that, remember, shortest bar first, so the green player actually gets first dibs on any one of the monsters. Green is going to go ahead and pick one of the monsters, and they're going to pick the witch, which is going to cost them 1 food. And it's also going to cost them 1 on the evil meter. Not a big deal for the green player. The red was the dummy just blocking the space, and then the blue player gets to get a monster for free. Well, I should say no additional cost. They still have to pay the cost listed on the upper right hand corner of the monster. Now they have two options. They can go ahead and take the witch or they can take the vampire. But looking at where they stand on the evil meter, they need to make sure that they're not going to get a priest, because a priest cannot be attacked by a vampire. Luckily, the blue player sees that they only have a thief. There's no other priests out for them to worry about, so they're going to go ahead and take the vampire, which is a pretty powerful monster for them. So it costs them 2 on the evil meter. Not quite high enough to worry about aggravating and sending the paladin out after them, so it's actually a pretty good decision for the blue player. That ends the resolving of all the orders for all of our players. We now move on to the part of the game where we all get to put our imps to work in our rooms if we can, and then we're going to pull our order cards back. And that's pretty much going to move us on to the taxation phase. First things first, the yellow player has 4 imps, which are definitely going to send out to the room. They need 4 imps in this room, which is going to give them a free trap, which is definitely a very good exchange for them. They're going to get the trapdoor trap. It's going to be placed face down so none of the other players can see it. Then the blue player, who doesn't have enough imps to work the gold room, so he can't send you over there. And the green player doesn't have enough imps to work this gold room either, so nobody else is going to send any of their imps out to any of the production rooms. So now all the players get to get all their order cards back, added into their hands, and they need to move up all their other order cards, because those order cards are going to be the ones that are not accessible to them when we come to the final season, which is going to be right here, where we get one more chance to do order cards for all of our players, which is going to give them a chance to get any more resources they can before we come to the end of the year where we have to protect our dungeons. Before we do that, though, we need to start worrying about taxation. So the Ministry of Dungeons is going to tax all of our dungeon lords based on just how big their dungeon happens to be. It's going to cost you 1 gold for every 2 rooms or corridors you have as part of your dungeon, rounding up. So we see that we have 5 corridors or rooms for the yellow player, so that's going to be 5 divided by 2, rounded up is going to be 3. So we're going to be taxed 3 gold by the Ministry of Dungeons that we have to pay. And again, we don't have to pay it, but if we don't, we're going to get those red marks, which are going to be worth negative points at the end of the game. So we're going to go ahead and pay that. The green player has a total of 5, which is going to cost them 5 divided by 2, rounding up is going to be 3 gold. And then finally, the blue player, who happens to have 6 rooms, divided by 2, is going to cost them 3 gold for taxation. All of our players have paid their taxes, and now we get to go over and figure out exactly which adventurers are going to come and attack our dungeon lords and start lining up outside of our dungeon to make our lives a little bit more miserable. There's no ties on the nicest meter, so this is going to be pretty easy for all of our dungeon lords. Yellow is going to get this guy. Now remember, anytime a fighter is added to a dungeon, he's going to move to the front of the line because they're kind of pushy and they like to take charge. And they're called meat shields for a reason, so it'll definitely go to the front of the line. Green, next highest up on the evil meter, is going to get the next adventurer, which is going to be the thief. And then finally, blue, as the highest on the evil meter, is also going to get a thief. So blue is not liking the way things are looking. Blue has 2 thieves coming to his dungeons, which can pretty much nullify any traps he throws at them. So he's going to start wanting to play smart and start concentrating on getting some monsters to protect his dungeon, because these traps are going to be dismantled pretty darn quickly by these thieves. That is pretty much going to end the summertime. We're now going to move into fall. After we move the first player token over, and after we pull all of our imps back because they're done working for the day for all of our dungeon lords who request that they toil in the dungeons, but not too hard because imps actually enjoy the work. It makes them happy. They're kind of like the 7 little dwarves, just they don't have a snappy little song to whistle while they work. It's now time for the fall time. We're going to move pretty much in and pretty darn quickly here. We're not going to be revealing any events, and we're also not going to be adding adventurers to the board, so the only thing we're going to be doing is adding rooms. Neither one of these 2 rooms were purchased, so we're going to reveal 2 new rooms, and we're going to get a room that's going to allow you to spend 2 imps and a food to create 1 more imp. It's called the Magic Room. And the other one is going to be 3 imps to raise your, or to lower your evil factor as it concerns for the citizens, which is actually a really good room, so we may want to be strategizing, especially for the yellow players trying to keep their reputation as low as possible. The witch was not purchased by anybody, so she's going to wander off to greener pastures. We're going to reveal 3 new monsters, getting the troll, a ooze, and finally the final monster we're going to get is going to be a ghost. Now we need to figure out exactly which orders all of our players are going to be having to carry out and deciding which orders the red player is going to be blocking off for all of our players and preventing them from having access to. And then once we decide that, we can go ahead and decide exactly what orders we're going to play. So we're going to start with the red player. We're going to shuffle up the cards and decide what orders the red player is going to be going for this turn. We know that the red player is going to be blocking off the purchasing of rooms. The red player is going to block off one of the trap purchasing spaces, and the red player is going to block off the adding of tunnels to our dungeon. Not a big deal for our players because I don't think any of our players right now are really considering adding to our dungeon just yet, but you never know. It may become a good strategy. We need to look at what all of our players are doing and figure out our strategy. So we're going to put the red on the purchasing of rooms. We're going to put a red on the purchasing of traps. And we're going to put a red on the purchasing or the adding or digging for tunnels on all of our dungeons. The yellow player needs to make a couple decisions now. We know as a yellow player we need to have at least one monster. So it's almost a foregone conclusion that we're going to go for a monster. And luckily we have the order card available for us. Now looking at all the monsters available, it's looking like the troll is going to be the best monster because if we can keep our reputation lowest, we know that we're going to get this warrior who's going to be coming up to the front line and we're going to need to be able to do at least 4 damage to take him out. So we'll definitely want the troll if we can get it, but we'll also need the food to purchase him. We're also going to need the food to pay him to make him do the extra damage. So we know we need food along with this monster. So those are our 2 big decisions. We need a monster and we need food. And now we need to figure out what we want to do with our remaining different actions. We actually have 2 options we can go for here. We can go for the room, which is going to give us a reputation, which could be a fantastic room to have. We have a good location for it that we can keep protected for quite a while, as long as we play smart, so it would be a good decision. Or the alternate thing is we can just go ahead and play it safe and go ahead and just get the improved reputation and not even worry about having to send imps to this room, because we know that we want to be sending our imps out here to be getting us our free traps as often as possible, which costs us 4 imps. And unfortunately, I leave us only with 2 imps left over, which is not going to be enough to power that room. And looking at everything we got here, there's only 2 potential chances for us to get rooms, and we know that both these players can go for rooms, and they're probably both eyeing that, especially the blue player who doesn't want to get their reputation too high because they want to stop that paladin from coming from them. If their reputation goes up 1 more level, they know that the paladin is going to come out, so they're definitely eyeballing this room and adding into their dungeon. Unfortunately, they don't have a really good spot for it. That's the trick for the blue players. So the blue players are going to have to do some strategizing, and it's probably going to start digging some extra tunnels themselves. So having said that, we're going to look at our remaining orders, and we're going to see that getting an imp would be great. It's going to cost us food, though, and we don't have the food to do that, so we're not going to go for getting the additional imp. We know we don't want the room. Digging tunnels wouldn't be so bad. It'd allow us to get our dungeon set up, or we can just go for work on reputation. I think what we're going to do is we're going to just go ahead and work on reputation to play it safe, to make sure nobody else does the same thing, making our lives difficult. Because we, as a yellow player, we want the lowest reputation, guaranteeing that we're getting this warrior because we don't want this thief. Because remember, our strategy hinges on having lots of traps and having these free traps. So we want to avoid getting that thief at all costs, because we're only going to have 1 monster plus a whole bunch of traps to protect our dungeon when the time comes. So now that we made our decisions, we need to decide in what order we want to do this. We're looking at what the other players are doing. We know that there's 3 monster spaces available. We know that only the blue player can get monsters because green can't. So we're going to go ahead and put the monster in the last spot, guaranteeing that we're lowest on the track here, meaning that we're going to get first dibs at any of the monsters. We know that getting food is very important to us, but we definitely don't want to be first. Actually, we do want to be first. I'm sorry. We'd rather spend the gold to make sure we keep our evil meter down, which means this final reputation card is going to be the next one. It's going to be the second one, and hopefully we'll get a little lucky and get some extra boosts on the reputation space, which will keep us down very low on the evil meter. That's all the decisions for the yellow players. Going to make the decisions for the green and blue player off camera. Now all the players have decided to place all their orders, and they decided what orders they're going to be taking. We're going to go ahead and reveal, starting with the green player since they're the first player. We're going to see that the green player is going for imps. The blue player is going to be expanding their dungeon, and the yellow player we know is going to be going for food. So starting in order, the green player is going to add their imp, or to the imp board. The blue player is going to send their minion out to go ahead and work towards building extra corridors in their dungeon, and then finally the yellow player is going to sit out there and work on getting food. And they're actually pretty darn happy with the results because they have the money to get the food, and they're not going to have to worry about their evil meter going up, which is exactly where they want to be. We move on to the green player. We're going to reveal that they're going to be going after food also. The blue player is going after rooms. And then finally, yellow we know is going to be increasing reputation. So green is going to go ahead and work on getting some food. Blue player is going to go ahead and work on getting a room. And then finally, the yellow player, they're going to go ahead and work on increasing their reputation. And they're also going to be able to look at the second combat card, because remember, the yellow player already knows what the top combat card is, the Detect Evil card. Moving on to the green player, we're going to figure out that they're going for traps. Blue player is going to go for getting some imps. And then finally, yellow player, we knew that is going to go for some monsters because they have no monsters at all. Starting with green, they're going to go out there after traps. Blue is going to go after imps. And then finally, yellow player is going to go out there and get some monsters without having to spend extra food. And since the only person going for monsters, they're going to get first dibs and only dibs and get to pick from the cream of the crop of all the available monsters. So now let's go ahead and resolve these orders and figure out exactly what's going to happen for our players. Starting with yellow, they're going to spend 1 gold, and that's going to go ahead and give them 2 food. Remember, they need food to feed that troll because that's part of their strategy. Green is going to gain 1 level on the evil meter, which is going to give them 3 food, which is okay for them because they're not anywhere close to being in danger to attracting the paladin. Yellow is going to go ahead and go down 1 level on the evil meter, and they're going to get to go ahead and look at the cards. They already know what the top card is, so they're going to go ahead and decide and look at the second card from the bottom, or from the top, which is going to be graffiti, which we see is also going to give 2 fatigue when we get to the fatigue portion of the combat phase. So the yellow player knows that the top card, remember, is a 2 fatigue, and the next card is also 2 fatigue, so they can start playing their strategy, knowing that information and knowing exactly what spells are going to be going off. We now move to the blue player, who's going to spend up to 2 imps to build their dungeon, which they're definitely going to do because they have an actual plan of what they want to do here. And then the red player is going to go ahead and take their space because they're just a blocking action space. Nobody's going for gold. Next thing we're going to do is green is going to be spending 1 food to gain 1 imp. An easy exchange for them. They're going to go ahead and gain 1 imp to add to their workforce. Blue player is going to spend 2 food, which they can easily accommodate. And that's going to gain them 2 imps, which is going to help them quite a bit, especially since they're about to start adding some rooms to their dungeon. We now move on to green, who's going to spend 1 gold. Their last gold, that's going to allow them to purchase 1 trap. They're going to get the poison meal trap, which they're going to add to the board face down, so none of the other players know exactly what trap they have. Red player was just taking up the space. Yellow gets to decide exactly what monster they want. Now, we already know what we're wanting here. We're going to spend the 2 food. We're going to get the troll. The troll is going to be added to our dungeon, and we have at least 1 food left over to pay him so we can make him stronger when the combat phase comes around. And then finally move over to the red player. The red player blocking the space, and we come to the blue player. They're going to get to pick 1 room at 0 cost, and they're going to go ahead and pick the room, which is going to allow them to increase their reputation, or we should say lower their reputation and make it better, without having to worry about the reputation, which is getting dangerously close to attracting the paladin. That ends the orders phase for all of our players, so all of our players are going to get their minions back. We're pretty much rounding down and rounding up to end out this year, and we're getting ready to go to the point where we're going to have to defend our dungeon from these adventurers who are going to come make our lives a little bit miserable after we did all this hard work building our awesome dungeons. Before we do that, though, all of our players get 1 final chance to do a little bit of production, as long as they have the imps to do so. Our yellow player is going to send 4 imps over to go ahead and work on building a trap. They're going to get the rolling stone trap, which is a pretty darn good trap, especially since we don't have to worry about any thieves at all. We're going to come over to the blue player, who's going to get the opportunity to put some imps to work in one of these rooms if they like. They need to decide if gold is more important than working on their reputation. Looking at where they are on the evil meter, they're going to send 3 imps out to make sure they work on some anti-propaganda to lower the reputation on the evil meter. And then finally, we're going to have the green players going to send 3 imps to go out to work to go ahead and earn 1 gold, and might as well take advantage of that room before we lose it at the combat phase. That ends the production phase, and now all the players are going to get their cards back. I'm going to go ahead and skip that to make this quick because we're getting pretty close to the end of this season and the end of this video. We're not going to have an event here because remember, we're not playing with the advanced rules. So now we're going to move on to the final part of the year, and we're going to go ahead and send these adventurers out to the dungeons. Starting with the least evil dungeon lord. He's the least evil dungeon lord is going to get the weakest adventurer, the adventurer furthest left. And since this is a warrior, he's going to push his way all the way to the front. The next is going to be the green, who's going to end up getting this thief. And then finally, the blue player is going to get the adventurer left over, which is the warrior, who is also going to push his way to the front, because that's what warriors do. And now we see at the end of the very first year, before we get to the combat phase, the standings are: our yellow player has to fight 2 warriors and a priest. Our green player has to fight a priest and 2 rogues. And finally, our blue player has to fight 1 warrior and 2 priests. And they're going to go ahead and start tearing through their dungeons. You have to figure out exactly what's going to happen and defend their dungeons from these adventurers. This would normally end the first part of the game, where we now need to flip over the board and we're going to go ahead and start the combat phase. But this video is running pretty darn long at this point, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the video short right here. And I'm going to clean everything up, organize it, so you can see all 3 of our Dungeon Lords boards. And once I've got it all set up like that, I'm going to start the second video where I'm going to show you exactly how the combat phases work for our Dungeon Lords, so you can see exactly how this works. And we're going to end out the full calendar year with that second video.